trouble is, job creation is so slow, it will be years before we get back to 7.5 million jobs lost in the Great Recession.
Shining a spotlight on our local warlord in Africa, Joseph Kony. It was posted on Monday, and as of this moment, it has been seen nearly 40 million
2010 has
times.
already been a disastrous year for Haiti, when a cholera epidemic erupted a few weeks ago. It's killed over 700 people.
Isaiah 61, verse 1, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." We kicked off this series called Reclaiming Justice a few weeks back. And we have used this particular text as a place to sort of drop anchor for this series. These words from the prophet Isaiah, it's a prophecy about the long-awaited Messiah. And more than that, what it does is it gives us a glimpse of the true nature and the true heart of Christ. This Savior that would come and bring good news to the poor. It says he would bind up, he would hug, he would embrace, he would cover the brokenhearted. He'd set those free that are being oppressed. You guys all know, I mean, unless you don't know me at all, I'm a Pirate fan, right? I'm a big Bucks fan. That is the team that I root for. I believe if we were trying to figure out who does Jesus root for, it's in this text. He roots for the poor, the brokenhearted, the oppressed. And I know there's a joke in there somewhere that Jesus probably is a Pirate fan then, because they're at times very brokenhearted. We kicked off this series, and we told you that, I kicked it off, that Jesus in his hometown of Nazareth, he preaches his first publicly recorded sermon, and he reads that text that I just read to the congregation. And he tells them, you know this long-awaited for Messiah that was going to do all these things? Well, he's in front of you. He's right here today with you. And he went on to tell them that he's not about vengeance or wrath. Instead, he's about revealing God's love for the very people that in that crowd that day would hope, their enemies, would hope that this Messiah would come back in vengeance and wrath. And Jesus turns the tables on him and he says, no, I'm going to reveal God's love, not just to them, but to everyone. And it said, if you remember, the room exploded in anger and they drove Jesus out of town. You know, I think so often Jesus came, now get this, to disorient things. What do I mean by that? Do you remember, like, maybe if you were on a new job, your first day of work, or maybe think back your first day of college on the college campus, right? They would often do something called an orientation, right? Maybe as a new student, you went through an orientation process for a day or for a weekend before the classes began, or on your job, maybe right before you begin the actual job that you're being hired to do, there would be an orientation process, right? They would just show you, you know, here's the lunchroom. Here's sort of some do's and don'ts around here. Here's the rules. They give you a policy and procedure manual, right? Right before you sort of got to work. Well, from what I read about Jesus in the New Testament, I believe at times he didn't really believe in orientations. Rather, he did disorientations. You know, he did not come and simply hand out a new policy and procedure manual. Rather, he undid old, exhaustive thought processes. He sort of blew up traditional paradigms. And then I loved it where he would just sort of casually say, you want something refreshing? Something that will truly quench your thirst? Hey, do you want something that will really quiet the turmoil in your soul? Do you want power that can bring you life in abundance? Then follow me. And at times, his teaching was certainly not pleasing to everyone. In the first 2 weeks, we clearly stated that Jesus deeply cares for the poor, the brokenhearted, the oppressed, and he desires us to do likewise as we follow him. And the goal of this series, I'm going to keep saying this each week, it's not to put you on some kind of a guilt trip for what you have or what you possess. No, instead, it's to help you understand the responsibility that comes with what you have and what you possess. I told you in week 1 of this series, remember I used this phrase, I want to challenge you to get out of your lane on this topic. Move to the left where Jesus is on this topic with the poor and the brokenhearted and the oppressed. And I told you that this was not going to be a pleasing series to everyone. This isn't one of those attendance booster series, right? Some catchy little, this is some tough stuff. And I just want to pause just for a second here. About a month or so ago, if you were with us in our, which series was it? It was the Hearing God series. And we had Ian Rosenberger here. Ian, remember he was the contestant on Survivor Palau, and he had his friend Tassi with them that he had met in Haiti. And they came and they shared their story. If you missed it, I would really encourage you to go back online and check it out. But very briefly, Ian, right after the earthquake hits Haiti, he goes down, he meets Tassi. Tassi has a tumor in his mouth and throat, and without serious surgery, he's going to die. I mean, he has absolutely no chance. The hospitals in Port-au-Prince are on the ground. There's no opportunity for him to have the surgery there. Ian decides he's got to do something. He sort of raises an effort with lots of people, and most importantly, God, and they manage to get Tassi back to the U.S. for surgery and saves his life. And out of that experience, Ian, he creates this nonprofit sort of organization called Team Tassi, and he's set on raising money and finding other children just like Tassi that are in desperate need of some medical attention. But I don't know if you caught this. He said that there's something very different about Team Tassi. He says that, yes, they provide that, but then they come around this child's family unit and provide education and job development and get the whole family up. And the only thing he asks for in return is that that family then finds another family in the neighborhood, in the community, and does the same thing. It's truly amazing. I had coffee with Ian this week. Pray for Ian. Honestly, man, he is just immersed in this stuff, and it is weighing on him heavy. He shot me a quick email that I wanted to share a couple pieces of it with you. It says, on our last trip to Haiti, we used some of the money that Northway gave that particular weekend. If you remember, we had something in the notes. You could send money, and he used it down in Haiti. Mark Noel is a dad, he says, of Ruth and Nathaniel. They're 2 of Team Tassi kids. So these are kids with some serious stuff going on in their life. Now listen, though. We helped the kids, but we helped Mark Noel, the dad, get a driver's license. And we helped him pay for English lessons so he could become a driver and a translator for visiting crews to Haiti and make money. We were proud, he said, to pay him to be our driver on the last trip. He said it was a happy moment, but also a terrifying moment when he threw him the keys and he was going to be their driver for the week. Earlier that week, he sat with a family in the living room and he asked Mark Noel, is Team Tassi different from other organizations that have helped in Haiti in the past, and if so, how? And I have Mark Noel's response up here. You can read along. It says, many organizations come, he said. The organizations change. Haitian people stay the same. They give you some food and they finish. They give you some money, some medicine, but not a job, and they forget about you. They don't care what we do after. Team Tassi is different. You sit with our families. You respect your promise. My situation has changed. I don't find this with many. I want to tell you and your staff, I am praying to God for them, Mark Noel. And by staff, folks, what he meant by that is all the people that have helped. And that's you. You know, on that particular weekend, it still blows Ian away to date. And you guys, I don't think we've announced this, but Northway across all 4 of our campuses gave $20,000 to Team Tassi on that weekend. And this is one of the families, the first of many, that are going to be helped directly from your giving. I need to say this to you folks. I'm consistently blown away by this congregation, by this community, how generous you are. And you step into these areas impacting people that are in crisis and need help. So seriously, hear me on this. Thank you. You know, last week in his sermon, Doug said, he sort of defined this word compassion, or being compassionate for those in needs, equals, he said at times, to provide direct relief to an immediate need. And that's what you did. Direct relief to an immediate need. Hear me on this, though. True compassion at times goes beyond giving relief. And Jesus' teaching on this sometimes is tough. In his first sermon, he made it pretty clear that his role, that he was coming to preach the good news to the poor, bind up the brokenhearted, to set free those that are captive and oppressed spiritually. So does he do this? You know, that was his very first sermon. It was like back in Luke 4. Does he do this? Does he go out and do what he said he was going to do? Well, in Matthew 11, Jesus' friend, his relative, his fellow sort of co-worker, John the Baptist, he's in prison. And it's basically because of his disorienting teaching, as he's called out sin and demanded repentance, has landed him in a difficult place, in jail. And he tells a couple of his disciples to go find Jesus with this question. In Matthew 11:3, they find Jesus and they say, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Are you the Messiah? Are you the person you said you were back at that very first sermon that you gave in Nazareth?" And Jesus answers, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, and the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me." In not so many words, what's Jesus saying? Yeah, I'm the one. I'm doing exactly what I said I was going to do. People are being set free. The poor are receiving the good news. And then this very, at least struck me, is this peculiar verse 6 there when it says, "Blessed is the one who is not offended by me." What does he mean by that? You know, I have to tell you, I got completely sidetracked on my studying over the last week or so on that verse. There's a very similar verse in Romans 9:33. And Paul says, "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." So folks, hear me on this, okay? You have heard me say this before. I said it on Easter weekend. You have to do something with Jesus. And that's the point that's sort of behind what Jesus means by this peculiar little phrase here. The theme in Matthew 11 and in that Romans 9 is precisely this. Everybody must contend with Jesus and exactly who he is. Everyone must come to grips with his identity and wrestle with what a difference that is going to make in his or her life. Truly, living for Jesus is going to challenge your thought process and blow up a few traditional paradigms. His words at times are very difficult to swallow. That is why our decision to follow Christ, to really answer his call when he says, come on, you want something new? Something that's going to quench your thirst, something that's going to give you abundant life, something that's going to set you free, then come follow me. And we can't just casually say something like, well, sure, I'll give that a try for a little while. No. If your relationship with Jesus, if your thought process is something like, well, I believe, but I'm not going to get all serious about it. Or if it's something like this, I believe, but my faith is between me and God. I don't really have to do anything about it. Or, a standard one. I believe, and therefore, I'm going to heaven, and I can sort of bend the rules now because he's going to forgive me, and we're good. If that is you, then may I dare confront you with the fact that maybe you are offended by him. Maybe he has become a rock of offense in your life. See, on account of what Jesus has asked you to become, have you become timid or ashamed or embarrassed or self-righteous or offended by him? If your response to Jesus' teachings, and we told you it's prevalent throughout all of his teachings. Look at your red letters in the New Testament, man. It's in there and all over the place. His teaching and his expectations when it comes to these areas of how we're supposed to respond to the poor and the brokenhearted and the oppressed. If it's something like, that's not my problem. I have too much else to do. The poor, they need to help themselves. They put themselves in that spot. They can work themselves out of it. Then according to this verse that sort of blew up my whole teaching time, my whole study time throughout this week, then it's quite possibly that you're offended by his teaching and his life and what is important to him. And Jesus is saying here, blessed are those that are not offended, not ashamed, not embarrassed, not timid, because they will be blessed and they will find favor. And that's the whole point of this series. And that's why we're digging into it. See if you can track with me on this, because if you're not dealing with this topic in your mind, if those in need, the poor, the struggling, the heartbroken, you're not considering them, then it's going to be hard to do anything about it. So let me ask you some questions, okay? And these are in your notes so you can look at them when you get home. Maybe think about this. In the last month or so, I'm going to throw 5 questions at you. I need you to be real honest with yourself. You're not going to raise your hand. You're not even going to tell the person beside you, okay, it's between you. Internalize this, but be serious about this. These are tough questions. Let's do church, okay? You ready? Buckle up. Let's do church on these ones. Be serious with yourself. Number 1, which occupies more of your thoughts? Those that are in need in your life or those that seem to be getting all the breaks? Think about your thoughts. What are you thinking about? In the last month, have you spent more time grieving or praying for those in need, or have you spent more time hoping someone you know gets knocked down a peg or two? Tough questions. Have you spent more time this month trying to help someone in need or trying to outdo, outachieve, or one-up someone around you? This one's tough. Ian said this one to me. When you have helped someone in need, do you do it until it makes you feel good, or do you do it until they are well? And the last one, in your walk as a believer, do you think more about what God could do for you or what you could do for God? See, I just really believe the first thing we've got to do is come to grips with this teaching, with this topic in our minds. Jesus' teaching on this. We've got to rest in it. We've got to think about it. We've got to at least consider and ponder it. Or we're not going to do anything about it. And I have to tell you, I've got a lot of work to do on this myself. And this series and this study time for this series has challenged me, impressed me, and disoriented me a bit. And I don't have it all worked out, and I am really trying to change lanes and move to the left on this topic where I believe Jesus is. At the end of chapter 11 that we've been reading there in Matthew, there's a verse that I sometimes like to refer to as a couple of my favorite Jesus verses in the whole New Testament. And he says this, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He's speaking to the brokenhearted here. Those that are maybe seem to feel like they're working in vain, fighting an uphill battle. There's a burden or a yoke, something heavy on them that is unthinkable and unimaginable to them. Like the Mark Noel story that I read you. And I believe Jesus, he's counting on us to help them. He wants us to be his instrument to bring soul restoration to those in need. And if we're not thinking about them, we're probably not going to do anything about it. Folks, again, I don't have this all figured out. I really do feel like I fall short on this. But I am trying because I believe it's so important to Jesus that it's got to be important to me. Hey, have you ever run into somebody that just loves to serve other people? You know, I mean, you just see it in their smile, in their heart, and they deflect all the attention and adoration. They never sort of take any of it. They love to encourage other people. They want to make other people's lives better when they're hurting. They truly grieve. And when they say they're going to be praying for your situation, you know they're going to be praying for your situation. When I meet someone like that, when I'm in the presence of them, I realize it's somebody in the left lanes on this topic. You know, in James, turn over to the book of James. It's in your notes. The book of James, chapter 1. "But be doers of the word, and not only hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing." You know, first we have to think about these things, consider these teachings, and then we have to do something about it. And I love the way that section closes, verse 27. "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." This is Jesus' brother, James, and he's being pretty blunt about it, right? He's saying, my brother told you to take the good news to the poor, and pure religion, pure Christianity starts with the widows and orphans. And can I just ask for permission right now to push you a little bit? I saw one person nod. Okay, so I'm going to, little push here. There are times when writing a check is the best thing to do. And frankly, Northway, you are amazing at it. But he said visit. He said get relational. He said get face to face. How? Two practical things I really want to leave you with, to have you consider. I'm going to give you examples from a recent trip to Haiti that I took right after that weekend with Ian and Brad Henderson from Pittsburgh Kids Foundation, an orphanage, several orphanages in Haiti that Northway has been supporting for several years, that Brad has been involved in for 20 years or so. Two things from my experience there, but these are applicable across the sea or across the street. at Ebok, this orphanage in Cap Haitian, Haiti, on my first afternoon, frankly, I got to tell you, it was overwhelming. 100 plus kids, ranging from about 4 years old up into kids in their teens, all orphans, all moving at once, and all extremely excited that we were there. They learn English at the orphanage, so having a conversation with them does not require a translator. And let me tell you, they all want to talk. And at one point, I just needed to sit down. Like, it was just overload. And I just needed to sit down. So I sat down, and there was this little dude beside me. He might have been 4 or 5 years old. And within about a minute, he just climbs up on my lap. And I mean, I might have rubbed his back for about 30 seconds, and he was out cold. I got a little picture from that day. Who looks like they're having more fun, me or him? You know, folks, my kids are grown up now, and I can't even tell you the last time that a little kid has fallen asleep on me. But there's something really sweet about it, right? And I sat there that day, and what I was really thinking is, with 100 and some kids in this orphanage and only a handful of caretakers, when is the last time this little guy had an opportunity to fall asleep on a dad's lap? When has his broken heart, been bound up? It's just 20, 30 minutes maybe he crashed there with all this chaos and noise around us. He just needed some rest. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Folks, do you know someone that just needs some rest? Maybe it's a single mom in your neighborhood that you could just simply take the kids for an afternoon or the night and allow her to have some rest and some peace. And see, my guess is, if no one's coming to mind, you're not considering it then. Because if you rest in this teaching and you consider those that are poor and brokenhearted and oppressed, God will put people on your mind that you can go and provide rest to. The second thing is just create some space for conversation. And I've got to tell you, on this trip, Tina, my wife, she was much better than me on the entire trip. I'm not much of a traveler. I've said that from up here before. And I know some of you might not believe this, but I'm really, at heart, I'm a bit of an introvert. Like, I was extremely shy all up until my 20s. There's still times in a conversation I feel out of place, and I really like at times to be alone. Well, forget about that at this orphanage. As soon as the sun comes up until it goes down, these kids want to talk. They want to know you. They want to have a conversation. And we would go out in this courtyard in the orphanage early in the morning. I mean, as soon as the sun came up. And I wouldn't see my wife, Tina, for the rest of the day sometimes. I mean, maybe for lunch if we were moving on somewhere else. She would just be out nonstop talking to kids. And there was this one little girl in particular, this Rosaline, that she became close to throughout just these few days. And this little girl took her around the whole facility. I mean, she showed her classroom, her desk, where she ate lunch, where she slept, every single thing. And they talked constantly. In fact, when I'd go over to check, I could see that this little girl would really prefer that I just move on because she was spending time with Tina, and it was important to her. I think there's a quick little picture of Rosaline, and Tina promised that she would keep in touch, and they've been writing back and forth, and Tina's been sending some stuff down, and she showed me this letter that Rosaline sent to her, and her first line was Mom. She called her Mom. And at the end of it, she said, "Your daughter." Folks, this little girl is just starved for conversation. She's an orphan. No mom, no dad. When has she had a conversation that moms and little girls just take for granted, right, all the time? She was starving for it. It was just obvious to me. Folks, who do you know in your world right now that is starving for friendship or a conversation? Someone maybe simply that needs to know that someone is checking in on them and cares for them and desires to talk to them. Maybe there's an elderly person on your street or a fatherless kid. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. You'll find rest for your souls, Jesus said. The yoke of the brokenhearted, it can be oppressing. You can help someone that's brokenhearted find rest, and you can lift their burden with a conversation. And again, as we've said sort of throughout this series, we're trying to stay away from specifics and allowing that to be between you and God. But next week, there is going to be an insert in the bulletin and a new addition to our website that is going to give you the opportunity to connect to many local and global poor, brokenhearted, oppressive situations that you can step into, read about, engage, learn, and decide if maybe that's a spot for you to get out and do something. And again, not because I'm trying to put you on a guilt trip, because you will be blessed. I didn't do anything for that little boy. Just gave him a place to crash for 30 minutes. I was blessed. Tina has been blessed by this little girl. You will be blessed when you reach out to the poor and the brokenhearted and the oppressed. Folks, I want to take a backpack full of burden-lifting, heavy yoke-removing, rest-providing stories with me to heaven. I want to see that little dude that napped on me in heaven someday and thank him. I can just picture Tina and this Rosaline in heaven walking off and continuing their conversation. I desire to meet people in eternity that bless me by saying something like, you know what, I was in need of a conversation. I was at a bad spot in my life, and you talked to me. You cared. I'm so hoping I've got a backpack full of stories where somebody comes up and says, man, I just needed some rest. I needed a break. And you stepped in and you gave it. Don't you want those stories? That's the point of the series. Jesus taught on it. It was important to him, and he wants us to be his instruments to reach out, because it will be a blessing to us. Will you commit to finding someone that's brokenhearted and providing them rest and conversation, and move from maybe not considering it all to thinking about it to acting on it? And you know, I just want to put a button there on the sermon. I want to move to something else just really briefly, though. My guess is in a room with this many people and across 4 campuses that are participating, there are some folks that still need to do something with Jesus. You've got to do something with this man. You've got to make up your decision to believe and follow with your heart. Or if you're just not ready to do that, I would encourage you to at least make a commitment to dig in, to understand, to try to figure it out, to knock on the door, to say, Jesus, if you're real, man, I need to know this. Because if you don't do either, you're going to be brokenhearted in spirit. Because I believe in my heart right now, there's some of you in the room, and you're saying to yourself, there's something missing in my life. There's something that's just not right. Even when things are really good, when things are going really well in my life, I just still feel this brokenness. Folks, that's the way that God has wired us up to be in relationship with him. And when we're not, we're broken, and we feel it. And if you feel that right now, if frankly, when I read that verse from Matthew, and you're saying to yourself, you know, I'm not so sure I can go help anybody else because that's me. I am broken. I am laboring really hard here. I cannot seem to find any rest at all. I need something in my life. That something is Jesus. And you gotta do something with it. Jesus initiated the conversation with you. God sent Jesus to you, to us, all of us that are broken in spirit. And he did all the work on the cross. He did all the work. And he kicked death behind by the resurrection and coming back to life so that you can have relationship with him. And all he says is, come to me if you desire rest, and I'll provide that for you. I'm going to ask at our other campuses right now that are participating with us if their pastor or leader would step up, and then here I will. But why don't you stand with me?